You're watching the India Development Debate. I'm Tamanna Inamdar. Over the course of the day, 3 news reports indicate that the government may have gone into damage control mode to stem fears of a growing economic slowdown. The first, a story broken by ET Now, that the PMO is stepping in and looking at some kind of an easing of the controversial super-rich tax for foreign portfolio investors. The second are reports that the budget recommendation to increase public shareholding in listed companies from 25 to 35% may be put on hold. And the third is a liquidity infusion of 10,000 crore rupees for housing finance companies. Seen all together, one could hope that the government is trying to do something about the economic slowdown that has gripped India. But the first step perhaps is to admit that we are in the middle of one. To speak on what exactly we are witnessing right now in the Indian economy, this chilling effect that everyone from corporates to investors to the average Indian is feeling, I am joined now by N.R. Bhanumurthy, Professor at NIPFP, M.K. Venu of the Wire.in, Gautam Chikarmane, Vice President at ORF, Market Expert Ajay Bagga, and MD and Chairperson of Biocon Limited, Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw. Welcome to all of you. Now, I'm going to divide this conversation into 3 broad questions. The first, how bad is it? The second, what caused it? And the third, what is the way forward? So let's begin with the first question, and I go to Ms. Shaw on that. How bad is it?
Well, there's no doubt about it that the economy is in a decline. I think we've all seen the various warning signals. You know, India's GDP growth rate this quarter has dipped to 5.8, and for the first time China has overtaken India's growth rate at 6.2. We know that the IIP numbers are down. We know that the auto sector is in deep distress. We know that the earnings have been steadily declining quarter on quarter. We've already lost the first quarter this fiscal. The second quarter is not looking too good. I think we need to really, stop being in denial. I think it is very serious. We do need to look at the economy and stem this fall.
Okay, Mr. Bhanumurthy, you know, some would argue that what we're witnessing is part of a kind of a problem around the world. Stemmed from, US-China trade wars, there are chilling global factors. Is what we're seeing in India a part of the global economy mood, or is it a problem that we very specifically have in the Indian context?
I think the problem seems to be both domestic as well as the international environment. We have seen how the exports have been declining for quite some time. So, and all those things are mostly related to the external environment. But my guess is that more than the external environment, I think it is the domestic economic environment seems to be in a bad shape. And as Ms. Shah pointed out, most of the indicators are actually showing downward. Except only silver lining in the whole macroeconomic data is that we have a slightly better inflation numbers. Otherwise, I think if you look at any number on the domestic environment, I think they seems to be doing downwards. But I think in your show only I have told some time back, the downward trend will continue for some more time. And that is one of the reasons why we were hoping a lot more things in the budget. Somehow the budget seems to have focused more on the long-term issues, not really focused much on the short-term, and that's one of the reasons why we see the domestic stock market seems to be reacting in a different way. So overall, I think we would have expected much more action on the fiscal front, but I think the government seems to have shied away from doing major initiatives in reviving the growth in the country.
Okay, Mr. Bagga, are we no longer shy about calling this an economic slowdown? And is it more of a sentiment thing? Because we see that as well, especially with the markets. It's more about feeling, about moods, about sentiment. So are we seeing that, or is it hardcore data which is spooking markets, investors, and in general corporate India?
It's hardcore data and sentiment also, because see, we are like a Japanese or a US economy in that a major portion of our GDP is consumption. And when private consumption expenditure is going down, you know, the growth has gone down to 7% year on year. We used to be 12%, 14% kind of growth, especially the rural economy, because rural wages have gone down to 3%, 4% kind of growth rates. There is no money in the rural economy, despite what you are putting in the competitive populism. You're putting money in the pockets in one way, but you know, by the inflation control, very tight
and
monetary policies,
record production,
but not getting enough MSPs, not getting enough commensurate money. What has happened is your consumption to go down on a subcontinental economy means a lot has gone back. We are tracking about 31 indicators, Tamanna. In the first quarter of this year, out of those 31 indicators, about 16 are trending downwards. 4 or 5 very major ones, like auto is the lifeline of the country. 42% of your manufacturing GDP is auto. That has gone negative. Coal India has gone negative. A lot of the other indicators are showing lesser growth than last year. Your port traffic has gone negative. Non-oil imports have gone negative. What that all is showing that there is a slowdown. Your 5.8, what Ms. Shaw said, will go down to 5.6, 5.7 in the June quarter, which is just ended. And we are expecting that with some policy intervention, hopefully next 2 quarters we start recovering. Hopefully last quarter was the bottom, but right now sentiment is jaded, sentiment is very poor, and we are seeing the data also showing a lot of difficulties. Along with that, there is a lot of what I think there are 2 people with courage in this country in the corporate world, Mr. Mohandas Pai and Ms. Shaw. These are the only 2 who have come out and called that you have given the power that was of the judiciary to the tax officials to arrest. You have seen arrests in GST, you have seen arrests in income tax.
Absolutely.
That kind of stuff is really unbundling, it's unwinding the sentiment, Tamanna.
No, that's absolutely right, Mr. Bagga, and thank you for calling that out. And Ms. Shaw, I must commend you on that, because we are, of course, in the business of speaking to corporate India, and a lot of conversations people prefer to have off the record. No one wants to come out and speak about how bad it is. And I just want you to respond to that. You know, the fact that you're one of the few corporate voices who is coming out and speaking out about what's going on.
Yes, it's very surprising, Tamanna, because you know, India Inc. should be speaking out at this time. I mean, everyone wants a very thriving economy, and I think we should realize that India Inc. and the government are on the same side. I don't understand why it is being perceived that we are on different sides of this economic debate. I mean, we should be on the same side, we should be working together, government should be reaching out, India Inc. should be reaching out, India Inc. must speak up. This is my point. If India Inc. remains silent, I think they are doing themselves a much more harm than good. We are a free country. We are a country that must not be worried or scared to speak up on these kind of matters. After all, you know, economic prosperity is for the good of all.
Absolutely, absolutely, and commend you again for speaking out like that. I hope the relevant people are listening and take that on board. But let me come back to the first part of this debate. How bad is it really, Gautam? You know, there are 2 parts to it. One is about the credibility of data, and I think that credibility is something that if it takes too many knocks, if there are too many questions, after a point, even the most hardcore believer starts thinking that, hey, is it just a coincidence that time and again so many voices have come and asked, is everything okay on the macro numbers? I'm referring to GDP numbers. You had someone like Arvind Subramaniam coming and saying it could be off by 2.5%. A previous CAG report has talked about the fiscal deficit actually being much larger. Do you think that that's contributing to a problem to some extent?
I think these data wars will continue. For every Subramaniam, there is a Vivek Debroy who's answering it in a different way, looking at the whole data in a different way. So I think this war will continue. We need to take data at face value. Whatever we get, make the best of it. But I just, Ms. Shaw raised a very important point. May I just comment on that?
Yes, yes.
She says that the government and the industry need to work together. And I completely agree with that. But I just want to ask one question. Apart from the crony capitalism years, when has the government and the industry worked together? They have always been at cross purposes right from 1947. All our laws are restrictive. They all have imprisoned, jail terms. They are so restrictive. The bureaucracy is so strong in trying to ensure that the entrepreneur does not do his job, that the wealth creators do not create wealth. If they do create wealth, we will tax them out of this country. 5,000 millionaires have already gone, and each millionaire who leaves carries with him a whole lot of knowledge. Capital going is okay. You can get some different capital to come in. But
what's the point you're making?
We need to understand what an entrepreneur brings to. I think, serially, one government after another, and unfortunately this government as well, has shown that it has contempt for entrepreneurs. It does not respect wealth creators. This is shown in various ways. For instance, if you look at the latest law that was passed, the company's amendment yesterday, 2 days ago, we saw how jail terms have been introduced for something as innocuous and noble, in fact, as CSR. Now, CSR is a simple tax. This government, with 303 seats in its pocket, should have removed this clause altogether. If it wanted, it could have raised rates, or I don't know. But to say that if you don't do right CSR in the way that we prescribe it or the way that we see it, then you will have to face imprisonment for 3 years. It's so ridiculous. And this has been happening law after law, legislation after legislation, government after government. So I think we generally, the state, including, now I'm not just talking about the government, but also the legislature and the judiciary. The state as a whole has some form of a contempt for our entrepreneurs. Without all we want our entrepreneurs to do is to create jobs and get out of the way.
No, but Gautam, you start.
Can I add one interjection?
I'm asking her my point to Kiran is the following. My question to Ms. Shaw is the following. When was the government and the industry working together? They have from 1947 they have been working at cross purposes. I think industries are being tolerated. They are not being encouraged. The government should be catalyzing industry. They are not doing that.
Okay,
this is my point.
Okay, Kiran, you want to respond to that?
Yes, that's right.
No, I don't. I mean, I agree with Gautam that there has been a lot of crony capitalism. There has been this scant respect for wealth creators and entrepreneurship. But I would also say that I, as someone who belongs to the new technology, have found it very easy to work very closely with government on policy matters. I haven't faced that kind of hostility from government, I must admit. I have worked, there's been a lot of trust between me and the government. I work very closely with the Department of Biotechnology. We have worked very closely on bringing about some very good policy decisions. So I don't quite agree with Gautam because I have worked very closely in the past.
Okay.
Today I find that there is India Inc. is being distanced. I mean, I used to remember that CII used to, question certain policies, have the freedom to ask questions of the government. The Prime Minister used to have a trade, council where we could express what we wanted to say. I don't find that happening in the same way today. Okay. Therefore, I believe the trust deficit has only increased between the government and India Inc. Okay. And it's time to bridge that deficit. It's time for the government and India Inc. to come together and say, okay guys, we have to fix this economic crisis that we are in and give us ideas. No, otherwise, we're going to constantly, be in denial. We are constantly going to come up with data that is going to delude us.
No, and this is not something that can be done without the participation of both sides. Ajay, very quickly, you wanted to come in with a point.
Yeah, just 3 data points. I don't have access to the information that Gautam or Ms. Shaw might have. I'll just tell you what's happening on the ground, Tamanna. This year to date, China has got $85 billion of FPI money. We got $10 billion till June 30th and we got -2 in July, post the budget mostly. We are nowhere. Second, 700 billion is the US companies' investments into China. They were making 120 billion of revenues, US based companies out of China. 30% of that has moved out. Has any come to India? Nothing. Where has it gone? Bangladesh, Vietnam, Philippines, Brazil, Mexico. So where is the ease of doing business? You should have had a ministry by now saying that taking business away from China into US ministry, you should have set up single window clearance. Entrepreneurs come, we take them to various bureaucrats. It's so difficult. I can give you off the record so many examples. Third very big issue, NBFC crisis. 1 year now, you've not had anybody. 2008 with Y.V. Reddy, Subba Rao and Pranab Mukherjee sitting there. We said we will take 6.5% fiscal deficit, but we will resolve this issue. We created lines overnight for mutual funds. We created lines for the banks, non-marketable securities. You should have had something like that.
I get your point, but you're jumping ahead to my next part of the discussion, which is why has this happened?
I need to, can I make a point to Ajay's, can I make a point on Ajay's data?
Yeah, okay, very quickly, Gautam, because I need to get Venu in and I need to move on to the other points in the discussion. So very quickly, Gautam. Yeah.
Right. So the only point I'm making is, where is the Narendra Modi who in 2 days, when Tata Motors faced a problem in Singur, was able to get land, permissions, everything, and get Tata Motors to start their plant in Sanand. We need that kind of proactivity now when companies from China are planning their exit to be brought into India.
What is stopping the government?
We need to see that Narendra Modi.
That
Narendra Modi is missing.
What is stopping the government?
What is stopping Narendra Modi from this?
There is not a majority, there is a super majority. Let me come to MK Venu. Let me come to MK Venu. Venu, sorry to come to you so late, but the first limited point about what is the problem? How bad is it?
See, Tamanna, all the industry market analysts have now started using a term which is now, I think, very significant. They are saying that this is a structural slowdown. Now, Tamanna, when you say structural slowdown, then how do you define a structural slowdown? That means there are structural problems in the economy which this government has been in denial about. The first the first thing to do, Tamanna, is to acknowledge a problem. For instance, this government has been saying, after coming to power, that the banking sector issues are all solved, NPAs have bottomed out, they are improving. But what they do not acknowledge is the banking sector problems have got transferred to the NBFCs, right? And there is a negative credit growth. NBFC balance sheets are shrinking, The other thing that they are not acknowledging is that there is a huge slowdown across the board. I have heard senior ministers, responsible ministers saying that auto is slowing down because of other reasons, because auto is moving into some other emission standards, so there is a certain fear about investments, or people are not buying because we are moving to some stricter standards from next year. But that is not the truth. As Mr. Bagga just said, most of the indicators are showing a decline. So there is a structural slowdown. So can the government, to begin with, concede that there is a structural slowdown? And Tamanna, I also heard a very, very worrying piece of analysis today by another analyst on a business channel, that the first quarter of this year has seen a 26% decline in government spending. So far we thought that at least government spending was keeping something going, because there is no private investment, consumption is slowing down very, very dramatically.
Yeah.
The government spending is also down 26%.
Is it because your fiscal deficit target has been tightened? Is it because your fiscal deficit target has been tightened?
So I'm coming to that, Tamanna. And Tamanna, the government should also acknowledge there is another worrying piece of data. First quarter revenue growth, Tamanna, is less than some 3%, 2%, whereas they have budgeted for some 20% plus revenue growth. So we are already staring at a fiscal crisis, which Ratin Roy, the director of NIPFA, describes as a silent fiscal crisis. Now, all this, Tamanna, all this needs to be acknowledged.
Yeah.
And CAG is saying that the actual fiscal deficit is 5.8%, not 3.4%.
We meant,
Please
yeah.
acknowledge.
Okay.
If
So
you do
how?
not acknowledge these structural issues, then we cannot solve problems. You know?
Okay, no, acknowledgement was one part of it, but let me come to the other part of this discussion about what led to it. Now, the very recent sort of trigger, quotes and quotes, has been the budget and the super rich tax. Now, it is apparently applicable to some 5,000 individuals. Is it correct that one increase in tax on one segment could trigger off this loop of events? Are we seeing sort of a sentiment depression by the super rich tax? And this question is for N.R. Bhanumurthy. Or are we seeing a set of very privileged investors throw a fit? Very simply put, these are investors with clout and they've thrown a fit, which we've seen in the markets. The narrative also has changed after that, isn't it?
Well, I think all these reasons may be attributed to this kind of slowdown that we see in the stock market right now. But as other analysts have said, I think the root cause for this slowdown is not really limited to the budget alone. It has been there for quite some time. It's also unfortunate that we are realizing that there is a silent fiscal crisis now. I have been arguing that we are in a bad shape even for the past 2 years. I think it all started with the demonetization, the way the GST has been implemented. In fact, the adjustment for this kind of two shocks seems to have taken much longer than what anybody has anticipated. So, I think the current slowdown is not really because of the recent issues alone, but mostly because of the kind of policies that we have adopted for the past 2 years. In the absence of the demand conditions, now the government seems to say that we are trying to stick to the FRBM Act very seriously. But that also, I think the CAG numbers have very clearly said that you are not really sticking to that.
So
but the basic problem here,
Professor
in my
Bhanumurthy,
view,
just to understand, you're saying twin shocks. Are you saying that this is a delayed impact of demonetization and GST implementation?
No, I think after that what happened is that
Partly, yes.
the kind of fiscal policy measure that we have been adopted by the government, I think that's I have been arguing that the kind of FRBM India is following is a kind of a flawed fiscal responsibility act. What we are following right now is not really what is there in the FRBM Act 2003. So, I think the kind of, in fact, it started with the FRBM committee report. Now, I think and it actually got into the finance bill of the last year. Now, what we are seeing is that we are seeing kind of a fiscal compression, especially when the economy is slowing down. We should be looking for a kind of a counter-cyclical policy measures. As I said, now in the absence of that, what government has done, that they have actually shied away from taking many measures in terms of investments. Okay. So, as somebody said that there is a decline in the expenditure also, there is also decline in the investments. So, overall I think there is a demand compression across the board, both on the household, on the corporate as well as the government. Okay. So, you do not expect the revival if you have compression on all segments of the economic activity.
Okay. So, we are looking for reasons. We are looking for reasons, and it's a complex topic, but I truly believe it impacts everyone, not just corporate India or investors. People feel it, daily wage laborers feel it. Yeah. So, I want to make the conversation in a way that everyone can understand it and identify with what's going on. I'm coming to you, Venu. I just want to come to Ms. Shaw on the second key question, which is why? Why have we come to this situation? In your view, what are the real reasons, Ms. Shaw?
So I think, there have been comments made about a multiple set of factors. I think GST implementation has certainly been contributing to part of that negative sentiment. And I still feel that we should, at least as a measure of good, triggering good sentiment, we should do away with the 28% tax. I think, Arun Jaitley in his first budget speech assured corporate India that he would actually bring down corporate tax to 25%. This still hasn't happened, and I think this is a very important trigger to again give a signal that profits and earnings can increase. There will be money to invest if there are opportunities to invest. I think sentiments have to be buoyed up. I mean, the markets are spooked, investors are spooked, investments are getting affected. So I just think that we don't have time, and I'm very surprised that the finance minister said that she was going to wait and watch. She cannot, because we don't have time to wait. We've got to act, we've got to take corrective action now, and that's why I feel that this is a call for action. This is a time when India Inc. must be made part of that process of looking for solutions, because without that I think we are going to really be staring again at a further declining economy.
Okay, call for action, and that was part of it, isn't it? When we come back to July 5th and why that became so important, I know you wanted to come in. It was because there were so many expectations that something would be done in the budget.
Yeah,
but there's nothing stopping the government from acting now. What is that action?
Yeah. So Tamanna, I'll give you one example of what action the government can take. For instance, there is data to show that some close to 2 lakh crore rupees are stuck in housing projects without the promoters being able to complete it. Now, can the government and the industry sit together and find ways of completing this project? Now, there is a lot of talk of various ways of dealing with this, but what are we seeing on the ground? Tamanna, all that we are seeing is a public sector company, NBCC, is being asked to take over unfinished projects. How much will NBCC do? They've been asked to take over Jayaprakash, JP infrastructure projects, Parasna, they've been asked to Unitech. Now, this is not a solution. And Tamanna, the real estate sector, as you well know, was a key driver of growth, one of the key drivers of growth, a major contributor to growth and employment, big growth to contribute to employment between 2004 and 2010, which is completely missing today. And similarly, there's the NBFC problem. Now there are some announcement in the budget about how to deal with NBFCs, how NBFCs have been given some some way of picking up or start lending, and the government will support. Now when you ask the NBFC people, they are saying we are waiting for more clarity on what the government wants to do. So again, coming back to Kiran Majumdar-Shaw's problem, the government needs to communicate. As somebody said, Narendra Modi was so proactively communicating and taking action on a day-to-day basis in Gujarat. But Narendra Modi is missing today, Tamanna, because my feeling is that Mr. Modi as Prime Minister is very different from Mr. Modi as CM, because Mr. Modi as Prime Minister seems to be only focusing on running a welfare state, which has
but these are
brought him back to power.
Yeah, but I'm going to give you a contrarian view.
At all on wealth creation.
Okay, but I'm going to give you a contrarian view.
He has creation,
but he has to fulfill promises to the people who have elected him, which is a vast majority, and what they've elected him for. Does that mean wealth creation is being ignored? Okay, I have another very controversial point to make, and Gautam, I'm going to come to you on this. There is a view that the government, this current government, has tightened the way business is traditionally done in India. They're expecting more tax transparency. They're cutting off and plugging all the loopholes that industry and small, medium, large, all industry had for tax evasion or not following the rules. And industry is not used to working in this environment. What we're seeing is the fallout of a Swachh Bharat Abhiyan in corporate India, and that is what is pinching. It's a controversial view. Again, it's one that people talk about behind the scenes. No one wants to come and talk about it in front of cameras. But do you think there's any truth in it, that corporate India is not used to working this way?
I have written at least three essays on this issue alone. Yes, this is happening. There was an old way of doing business, which included crony capitalism, which had three parts. One was the company, the entrepreneur. Second was the bank. And third was the politician. All three worked together to get work done in a particular way. That trickled down to smaller loans, smaller businesses here and there, small entrepreneur there, evasion, etc. There was this old way of doing business. Our restrictive laws ensured that there was no other way to go about it. Modi is trying to create a new way of doing business. For instance, the GST, which has several problems and which the government is trying to fix, is also an all digital network of tax, which means that nobody can evade taxes because one person's tax is dependent on the previous person's. Such things, the Benami Transactions Act, all these laws are coming together. He's trying to introduce a new way of doing business. India Inc. is caught in that cusp, in that transition from the old way of doing business, which they were used to and are habituated with, towards the new way of doing business, which is clean, relatively clean. I'm sure there is corruption at the lower,
so
at the factory floor level.
The bitter pill is making the patient sicker?
There is a green level. No, I'm saying there is this transition. And in this transition, neither the government nor the industry is able to negotiate what exactly is going on. Should they continue as they were? Which if they do, then you get investigated by SFIO and Enforcement Directorate? Or should they try and do the new way, but which would mean giving up on loans, giving up on certain other benefits? A lot of companies, smaller companies, not large ones, a lot of companies, the entire revenue model was tax evasion. Now that has gone. So what do you now do? It is this transition that the government, the industry, the economists, thinkers, everybody needs to now concentrate in transiting India from the old way of doing business to the new.
But a transition has to be phase-wise based. If you're saying that a part of what we're seeing, I'm sure it's not all of it, is because of this transition to a new way of doing business, then do we need to re-look at the pace at which we put forward these changes? Because industry also has to survive.
Very much.
Not only the pace, we need to.
Well, Ajay wants to come in on that.
Not only the pace, we need to also look at the timing.
Okay,
absolutely.
Can I just finish this? We also need to look at the timing
with too
because
much overdose of
the global.
Tamanna.
No, also the timing. Today there is global contraction. The global growths are going to be down by 0.1 percentage point to 3.4%. India is down by 0.3 percentage point. These are the latest IMF outlooks, which can go even lower. At a time when there is this global slowdown happening, of which India is a part, to tighten the belts at this, so there is a question of timing other than doing.
Ajay.
I think it's a very huge problem of comprehensiveness of policy. I'll give you two small examples, Tamanna, so that viewers can understand. Anybody who's anybody from a clerk to the head is going and talking about electrical vehicles. What has China done? They started with the public transport. So nearly all cities now have buses running on electric vehicles. They have 1 million charging points. Our biggest company in that ESL, they come and say we are going to do 1,000 charging points this year. You don't have the raw material, your auto companies are not retooled, you want to do it by diktat, you are telling that I will do sanctions on two-wheelers, three-wheelers because I asked them to give a plan, they have not come with a plan. Comes back to you're treating everybody as a thief. Second, you can't force change like this down. Yes, I always say solar is the petchem of India. If we can do the battery revolution, cut down your $120 billion that you transfer to the Arabs every year, do that. But you can't do it overnight. You can't retool factories. You have 50 lakh people working in the auto industry, which is hurting today, which is 42% of your manufacturing GDP, and you go and treat them. Second big part, what we did in 2008, again I come back to it, that was the crisis here, global crisis. You moved overnight to cut excise duty on auto.
Okay. I'm almost out of time, so I'm just going to take some very quick inputs, and it's becoming a fascinating debate. Very quickly, Venu, very quickly, the point you want to come in, and the bureaucrats get blamed. It's about bureaucrats giving bad advice.
No, it's not about bureaucrats giving bad, Tamanna. It's about how they are doing this transition into a new way of doing things. A minister, I remember, said that GST was being implemented the way it was, messy, because his own words, he said, we are sailing in a ship that we are also building simultaneously. No, you don't do things like that, you know, you don't, and the demonetization, GST, etc., has resulted in a 4 percentage point fall in our household savings rate.
Okay.
Now, we were told that this will bring a lot of resources into the mainstream,
Yeah.
but what we are seeing is actually a decline in savings.
Okay, I have to take a
there are
point
lot
of view from Kiran on
problems. This government, looks at everything in a very piecemeal way.
Okay, I have to take a
there is
point.
no
I have to
macroeconomic
take. I
policy
have to
vision.
take a view from Kiran, since we've talked about corporate India having to change the way it thinks and having adjustment problems. Kiran, do you think there's any truth to that theory? And Gautam says he's written 3 pieces on it. Do you think there is merit to that argument?
I mean, there is some merit to it, but more than anything else, I just feel that today the government is basically taking a very unilateral view of anything and everything to do with policy, and I think they need to have stakeholder consultation before they roll out these things, because they need to hear voices which are actually at least questioning some of the policy decisions that they are taking.
Okay.
And without, if they go about it in this unilateral way without consultation, this is what is going to happen.
Absolutely. Okay, we'll have to wrap it here, but I want to thank all of you for this fascinating conversation. We will have much more of these discussions over the time to come, and the big takeaway, that talk more. Maybe industry and government need to get together and talk more, because at least these two are major components of any solution we can find to braving the slowdown, and a solution we must find, no question about that. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us on the discussion. Very short break on India Development Debate. Don't go away. Interesting segment up next. New one, the jobs of the future. Will your job become redundant in the next 10 years? What will be the next big job market? We're coming right back with that.